I never thought I would find myself in this situation. My name is Mike, and I had the perfect life, or so I thought. I was married to Laura, a woman I believed was my soulmate. We had been together for 7 years, had a beautiful house in the suburbs, and even talked about starting a family. But recently, things had begun to shift. It started small. She was less available, spending more nights out with friends and returning home later than usual. When I asked her about it, she'd shoot me a quick smile and say, "Just work, babe," or "You know how it is with the girls." I was willing to brush it off as stress. After all, we both had demanding jobs. I worked as a graphic designer while she was climbing the ladder in the local political scene, always attending meetings, fundraisers, and networking events. I admired her ambition. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Then came the day that changed everything. I was working from home one afternoon when I received a text from an unknown number. It was an image that sent my heart racing. The photograph showed Laura with a well-known local politician, Mark Stevens. They were laughing over drinks at a bar, their faces so close it looked intimate. My gut twisted. I needed to know more. I started paying closer attention to her behavior. I noticed her phone buzzing incessantly, often with messages she quickly dismissed. I thought I was overreacting, just a jealous husband trying to find fault. But the nagging in my chest wouldn't let up. A few days later, I decided enough was enough. I followed her one evening when she claimed she was going out for a team dinner. What I saw was gut-wrenching. Laura was in a cozy corner booth with Mark, and they looked more than just friends. I watched as they shared a bottle of wine, leaning into each other and whispering conspiratorially. I felt sick. This was no team dinner. I couldn't move. I felt paralyzed by disbelief and the anger that began to bubble within me. The next evening, I confronted her as soon as she walked in the door. I could tell she had been drinking a little too much. I threw the question at her like a dagger. "So how was your dinner with Mark?" The look on her face was one of confusion, like a deer caught in headlights. She stuttered, trying to come up with something, anything to deflect. "What do you mean? It was just a work thing, Mike. You know how it is." I cut her off, feeling my heart race. "I saw you, Laura. You were all over each other. It's not just a work thing." I had never yelled at her before, but the betrayal ignited a fire in me, one I hadn't known existed. Her demeanor shifted. She went from confused to defensive in seconds. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You need to trust me," she snapped, her voice laced with anger. "You're just being paranoid." Paranoid. I was furious, heartbroken, and utterly betrayed. I couldn't listen to her excuses anymore. I demanded the truth, but all she gave me were more lies, tangled with a mix of indignation and feigned innocence. I felt like my whole world was collapsing around me. I had loved this woman, devoted my life to her, and she was lying right to my face. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me, quickly followed by a rising tide of anger. As I stood there, I realized I had to make a choice. I could either let her walk all over me or take control of my life again. I was done with the lies and deceit. I needed to make her understand the consequences of her actions, not just for my sake, but for her and Mark as well. I began to formulate a plan. I wouldn't let them get away with this. I would expose the affair, bring their secrets to light, and let the world see the hypocrisy of a politician who preached family values while cheating on his wife. Little did they know, I had a few tricks up my sleeve, and the game was just beginning. After that explosive confrontation, I felt a mix of emotions swirling inside me: anger, sadness, and an overwhelming urge for justice. Laura was still trying to play the victim when all I wanted was for her to own up to her mistakes. I needed to remind her that actions have consequences, and she wouldn't just get to walk away from this unscathed. For the next few days, I observed her closely. Laura kept up appearances, acting as if nothing had happened. She even tried to be affectionate, hoping to smooth things over with me, but I wasn't having any of it. I was a man on a mission. I began by digging deeper into Laura's and Mark's lives. Laura had many contacts in the political world, but I wasn't entirely familiar with them. So I started researching Mark Stevens. I found out that he was not just a local politician. He was also a rising star, a media darling who had his eyes set on a bigger position. But with that success came a trail of scandals that people were whispering about behind closed doors. I reached out to a few connections I had from my graphic design job. I let them know I was looking for dirt on a local politician. They were more than willing to assist. People love gossip, especially when it involves public figures. I received a few leads about his questionable decisions during his campaign, but I needed something more serious to really hit hard. Days turned into a week, and my life revolved around piecing together the puzzle of Laura's betrayal and Mark's faults. I found a few stories about Mark's past, rumors about inappropriate relationships with staffers, questionable campaign financing, and even allegations of exploiting his power to get what he wanted. But I wasn't interested in the mundane gossip. I was looking for the kind of scandal that would bring him crashing down. Then, I stumbled upon a goldmine, a story from a few years back about a young woman who had claimed that Mark had pressured her into an unethical relationship while she worked as an intern. The report had been buried, but the details were juicy, especially with the right spin. I couldn't believe my luck. This was exactly what I needed. I reached out to the woman using a fake identity, and after a few conversations, she agreed to share her story. She was hesitant, understandably so, but once I explained my situation and how I planned to expose Mark, she was all in. I needed her to be a part of this because her voice would lend credibility to my claims. As I compiled all the evidence, text messages, social media interactions, and even the intern's revelations, I could feel my heart racing with anticipation. The thought of seeing Laura and Mark squirm under the weight of their actions fueled my desire for revenge. I was no longer the victim, I was the one holding the cards. On a Thursday night, when Laura was due home late from another one of her meetings, I sat down to draft an anonymous letter. This letter would be the catalyst for the chaos I intended to unleash. I outlined everything I knew about Mark and included the intern's story. I made sure to state that I had evidence and that I was ready to go public if necessary. I knew Mark had a reputation to maintain, and his political ambitions were riding on public perception. If I could plant this bomb in the right hands, it would detonate right in his face. I sent the letter to a few journalists known for breaking political scandals. It felt exhilarating, like standing on the edge of a cliff and preparing to jump. The day after I sent the letter, I noticed a shift in my own emotions. I was still angry, but there was an odd sense of calm that washed over me. Perhaps it was the adrenaline of taking charge of my own narrative. I was going to be the one dictating the terms of this situation, not Laura or Mark. As I waited for the fallout, I decided to confront Laura again. I wanted to see how she would react to the impending storm. I had gathered all the evidence in a folder, neatly organized and ready for use. When she walked in that evening, I could tell she was anxious. Her phone buzzed constantly, and she kept glancing at it, clearly preoccupied. "Guess who's in the news?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up at me, confusion etched on her face. "What do you mean?" "You'll see," I replied cryptically, a smirk creeping onto my face. As I watched her fidget, I felt a sense of satisfaction. She had no idea what was coming. I was ready to watch her world crumble around her just as mine had. The tables were turning and I was finally in control. I felt powerful and I soaked in every moment of it. I had been wronged, but now I was going to make sure that justice was served. Little did Laura know, the fallout from her affair was just beginning. I was ready to watch everything unfold, to see the consequences of her actions play out in real time. The days passed slowly, each one filled with a sense of anticipation and dread. I kept tabs on Laura, watching her as she unknowingly walked into the storm I had begun brewing. She was still going about her life, blissfully unaware that the world she had built on lies was about to come crashing down. I had been checking the news obsessively, hoping to see the scandal breaking. The anticipation was palpable, electrifying even. I could feel the weight of the evidence I had collected. It was like a ticking time bomb poised to explode. But I also knew I had to be patient. The right moment to reveal everything would come. Then one afternoon, I received a call from one of the journalists I had contacted. "Mike, we've got a lead on the story you sent us," she said, her voice brisk and businesslike. "We're going to run it tomorrow. It's shaping up to be quite explosive." My heart raced. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I could already envision the headlines splashed across the front pages. Local politician's secret. Life exposed. The thought sent chills down my spine. As the day drew closer, I managed to keep things normal at home. Laura still had no idea that I was the one who had set this in motion. She was still in the habit of trying to be sweet, suggesting dinner plans and cuddling on the couch. I played along, but inside I was a volcano ready to erupt. The next morning I woke up early, my stomach a knot of excitement and nervousness. I brewed coffee and turned on the news, waiting for the announcement. Just as I took my first sip, the anchor came on with a serious expression. Breaking news this morning. A local politician, Mark Stevens, is facing serious allegations of misconduct following a bombshell report that has just surfaced. I nearly spilled my coffee. The anchor continued, detailing the accusations, including the intern's story and a series of questionable financial dealings. The segment was intense, and I couldn't help but feel a rush of satisfaction wash over me. I waited for Laura to wake up, knowing that this would be a moment I would never forget. When she finally stumbled into the kitchen. Still in her pajamas, I could see the confusion on her face as she caught snippets of the news. "Mike, what's happening?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. "Looks like your little friend Mark is in hot water," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. I can't describe the joy that surged through me as I watched her face change from confusion to realization. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. She rushed to the television, her eyes wide. I leaned back against the counter, crossing my arms, a smirk playing on my lips. "You know, the man you've been spending so much time with, seems he's not as squeaky clean as he pretended." As she watched the news unfold, her expression shifted from disbelief to panic. I could see her mind racing as she processed the implications of the report. "This can't be happening," she muttered to herself, running a hand through her hair. "Why not? He's just a politician, right? They're supposed to be honest and trustworthy," I said, my tone dripping with sarcasm. I was reveling in the power dynamics, enjoying the shift in our relationship. Soon, the phone started. Buzzing with alerts, texts from friends, colleagues, and family, all reacting to the news. I watched, a twisted sense of satisfaction creeping over me. Laura's phone was blowing up, and I knew she was being pulled deeper into the mess. "Mike, I need to talk to him. This is serious," she said, frantically trying to gather her things to leave the house. "Talk to him about what? How you've been cheating on your husband with him. How you didn't think this would catch up to you." I shot back, feeling the anger surge again. "Just stop it, you don't understand. He's going to lose everything," she cried, tears welling in her eyes. The facade was crumbling and I was reveling in it. "Exactly. He's going to suffer the consequences of his actions, just like you will. You think you can screw around and not pay the price." I was enjoying this catharsis, the way it felt to finally flip the script. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Mike. It just happened. She began, but I cut her off. "No, Laura, this was a choice. You chose to betray me for a man who is going to. Headline for all the wrong reasons. You chose pleasure over honesty." Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was a call from Mark. I felt a surge of glee at the sight. She hesitated to answer, looking at me for permission, but I knew I wouldn't allow her to get away with this. "Go ahead, take it. Let's see how you explain this one," I said, leaning back against the counter. "Mike," she hissed, but I couldn't care less. She answered the call, her voice shaky. "Mark, what's happening?" I saw the news. I tuned out the conversation, focusing instead on the chaos around me. The fallout was unfolding right before my eyes, and I felt a sense of vindication. I had set the wheels in motion, and now it was all coming together. As I watched her panic with each word spoken on that call, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. Laura had chosen this path, and now she was going to deal with the consequences of her actions, and I was ready to watch every moment of it. It was no longer just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life. The journey was far from over, but I was finally moving forward. I had taken control, and I was determined to see this through to the end. As Laura hung up the phone, her face was pale, her hands trembling. "Mike, we need to talk about this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I could see the panic in her eyes, the realization that everything she had built was falling apart. "Talk about what? How you've been unfaithful, how you've been lying to me for months." I replied, my tone cold and unforgiving. I was done with her excuses. She had made her bed and now she had to lie in it. I know I messed up, but I didn't think it would come to this. I didn't think you would. She trailed off looking for the right words. I could see she was trying to play the victim, but the sympathy I had once had for her was long gone. You didn't think I would find out, or did you just not care? I shot back. You were too busy enjoying your affair to consider the consequences. You thought it would be all fun and games with Mark, but he's the one who's going to drag you down with him. She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off again. You wanted power and excitement, and look where it's gotten you. You're about to lose everything, Laura. As she paced the room, I felt a sense of satisfaction wash over me. I was no longer a passive participant in my own life, and I was reveling in it. The heartache was still there, but this new dynamic was intoxicating. I was the one calling the shots now. The phone buzzed again, this time with a text from one of her friends. Can you believe what's happening with Mark? It was a group chat filled with worried messages, and she glanced at it, her panic deepening. I can't just sit here, I need to go help him. She insisted, grabbing her jacket. Help him how? By lying for him, by covering up your affair. I countered, stepping in front of her. You've got it all backward. You need to deal with this, not run away from it. I have to protect my career, Mike. You don't get it. This could end everything for me. She wailed, her voice cracking. No, Laura, you need to face the music. You made your choices. Now it's time to face the consequences. I was firm, unwilling to let her manipulate me with her tears. She fell silent, the weight of her actions crashing down upon her. It was a moment of clarity, and I could see the realization dawning in her eyes. She was in trouble, and there was no escaping it. As the reality set in, she broke down, sinking to the floor. I'm so sorry, Mike. I never meant for any of this to happen. It was a mistake. The tears streamed down her face, and for a moment I felt a flicker of sympathy. But that was quickly eclipsed by the anger and betrayal that had been simmering inside me for too long. It's too late for apologies, Laura. You can't just say you're sorry and expect everything to go back to normal. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it. The reality of our situation hung heavily in the air, and I could see her trying to process what was happening. Her phone rang again, but this time she ignored it, choosing instead to sit in silence, wrapped in her thoughts. I never wanted to hurt you, she finally said, her voice barely audible. I don't know, I wanted something different, something exciting. Exciting? You wanted excitement at the cost of our marriage, at the cost of your integrity. I replied, my voice rising. You threw it all away for a cheap thrill, and now you're scrambling to save face. You don't get to play the victim here. She looked up, her eyes glassy with tears. What do we do now? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Now we let the world see what you've done. You need to own this, Laura. You can't hide from it anymore. A mix of fear and defiance crossed her face. You're going to tell them everything. No, I said, my voice steady. But I'm not going to protect you from the fallout either. It's time for you to take responsibility. The tension in the room was palpable, and I could see the storm of emotion swirling within her. She wanted to fight back, to argue that this was all a misunderstanding, but I wasn't going to let her manipulate me any longer. I can't believe this is happening, she whispered, shaking her head. I never thought it would come to this. Well, it has, and you need to wake up. You're about to lose your career, your reputation, and potentially our marriage if you don't step up and face the truth. After a long, agonizing silence, she nodded, finally understanding the gravity of the situation. You're right, I need to face it head on, she said, her voice steady. Good, then you need to prepare yourself for what's coming. This isn't just going to blow over, it's going to get messy. The realization hit her, and she looked more vulnerable than I had ever seen her. What if they blame me? They should. You're not innocent in this, Laura. You made your choices, and now you need to own them. As we sat in silence, I felt a sense of closure starting to settle in. I had taken the steps to reclaim my power, and now it was her turn. Whatever happened next, I was ready to face it. The fallout was just beginning, but I was determined to stand my ground. I had fought hard to regain control, and now I was ready to watch the consequences unfold. The stage was set, and I was prepared for the show. After our intense conversation, Laura seemed to be in a state of shock. The reality of the situation was hitting her hard, and I could see she was struggling to process everything. I had stripped away her illusions, and now she was faced with the consequences of her actions, and it was a long way down. Over the next few days, the fallout from the scandal began to unfold. News outlets were buzzing about the allegations against Mark, and the story was spreading like wildfire. I watched as Laura attempted to navigate the chaos, but she was clearly struggling. She was torn between wanting to support Mark and the reality that she had put both our lives in jeopardy. At home, the atmosphere was tense. Laura was glued to her phone, constantly checking for updates and messages from her friends and colleagues. I felt a mixture of pity and resentment as I witnessed her unraveling. The woman who had once been so confident and ambitious was now a shell of her former self. "Mike, I need to talk to him," she insisted one evening as we sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the silence thick between us. "Talk to him about what?" "How to manage the damage control," I replied, my tone sharper than I intended. "You're still thinking about him, aren't you?" She looked down, avoiding my gaze. "I'm just trying to figure out how to handle this. We need to come up with a plan." "A plan? You mean how to keep your career intact while he takes the fall for both of you?" I countered. "What about your own responsibilities?" "I never wanted any of this," she shot back, her voice rising. "I made a mistake, but I didn't think it would blow up like this." "That's the problem, Laura, you didn't think. And now you're scrambling to put the pieces back together," I said, frustration boiling over. She sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I know, I messed up, but I need to be smart about this. I don't want to lose everything." "Then you need to wake up and face the truth. You're not the victim here," I said firmly. "You put yourself in this position, and now you need to take responsibility for it." As the evening wore on, I could feel the tension still simmering beneath the surface. I had taken a stand for myself, but our relationship was hanging by a thread. I wondered if I could ever trust her again after everything that had happened. Then the next morning I woke up to find Laura in the living room, pacing and on the phone. She was visibly upset, her voice shaking as she spoke. I caught snippets of her conversation. It sounded like she was trying to salvage her image, pleading with someone for help. I could only imagine how desperate she was feeling. When she hung up, her face was ashen. "I just spoke with my boss," she said, her voice trembling. "They're having an emergency meeting to discuss my position. I might get suspended." I watched her, trying to suppress the feeling of satisfaction that bubbled up inside me. "You mean they're finally holding you accountable?" I replied, unable to resist the urge to twist the knife. "Seems fitting." "Mike, this isn't funny," she snapped, her frustration boiling over. "I have worked so hard for my career, and now it's all going to waste because of one mistake. Maybe you should have thought of that before you decided to cheat on your husband with a prominent politician." I shot back, my voice unwavering. She fell silent, her expression a mix of anger and despair. "I didn't think it would come to this. I thought I could manage it, that I could keep everything separate," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Clearly, you were wrong," I replied, allowing my words to sink in. The next few days were a whirlwind of chaos. The media swarmed around Mark, and the political fallout was severe. It felt like a slow-motion train wreck, and I was both horrified and fascinated by the destruction unfolding before me. I could only imagine the pressure Laura was under as she watched everything unravel. As the news continued to spread, I noticed Laura becoming more withdrawn. She was still in denial about her role in everything, often muttering about how unfair it was that Mark was getting all the blame, but I refused to engage in her victim mentality. One evening, as she sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, I decided to push the issue. "Laura, you need to own this. You can't keep deflecting the blame onto Mark. You made choices that led to this," I said, my voice firm. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and frustration. "You don't understand. Mark is the one who led me on. I was just trying to have a little fun." "Fun? You think this is fun? Your entire life is falling apart because you chose to have fun at my expense." I shot back, my anger flaring again. "You don't get to play the victim here, not anymore." Her expression softened, and I could see the flicker of understanding in her eyes. "I know I messed up, but I didn't think it would cost me everything. I thought I could manage it," she said, her voice low. "Stop saying that. You need to understand that this isn't just about you. Your actions have consequences, and now you need to face them." I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. As the days dragged on, I could see the toll the scandal was taking on Laura. She was becoming more anxious, more desperate to salvage her career and reputation. I felt a sense of detachment from her struggles. I was no longer emotionally invested in her outcome. I had taken back my power and it felt liberating. Finally, the day of her emergency meeting arrived. I watched as she dressed meticulously, trying to put on a brave face. But I knew better. The facade was cracking and she was terrified. "Good luck," I said as she headed out the door, trying to sound supportive. But inside, I felt a sense of satisfaction at the thought of her facing the music. The hours dragged by as I waited for her to return. When she finally walked through the door, her expression was a mixture of relief and despair. "They suspended me," she said, her voice trembling. At that moment I felt a sense of finality settling in. "What now?" I asked, my tone careful. "I don't know, I'm going to fight this," she replied, but there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "Are you willing to own the truth, to face the consequences of your actions?" I pressed, wanting her to truly grasp the weight of the situation. I have to," she said, her voice barely a whisper. As we stood there in the silence of the living room, I realized that this was the turning point. Whatever happened next, it was hers to face. I could only hope she would finally understand the impact of her choices. I was ready to let go of the past and embrace whatever lay ahead, no longer tied to her deception. The fallout was here, and I was determined to move forward, whatever the outcome. The days following Laura's suspension were a roller coaster of emotions for both of us, but I found myself feeling more liberated than ever. The weight of the betrayal was still heavy on my heart, but I could finally breathe without the suffocating worry that had consumed me for months. Laura was now forced to confront not only the consequences of her actions, but also her own role in the deterioration of our marriage. She spent hours on the phone, trying to reach out to anyone who might help salvage her reputation. As she did, I focused on myself, doing everything I could to reclaim my own sense of identity. I started going to the gym more regularly, reconnecting with friends, and even picked up some old hobbies that I had put aside while trying to support her ambitions. I was determined to move on, no matter how difficult that might be. Laura continued to spiral. She had moments of clarity where she acknowledged her mistakes, but then she'd revert to anger and denial, blaming Mark for everything. "If he hadn't pursued me, I never would have cheated," she'd shout, her frustration boiling over. I tried to remind her that she had made choices, but she often deflected, caught in her cycle of self-pity. One evening, I decided to take a stand. I sat her down, our faces mere inches apart. "Laura, you need to stop trying to deflect blame. You're responsible for your choices. It's time for you to accept that," I said. Firmly, my eyes locked on hers. I know," she replied, her voice filled with frustration. "But I just don't want to lose everything. I thought I could fix this." "Fix what?" "Your reputation, your career. You can't fix what's broken by ignoring it," I urged. "You need to confront it head on, take responsibility for your actions. Only then can you truly move forward." I could see the conflict within her, the battle between wanting to protect her image and needing to accept the reality of her situation. "What if I lose everything, Mike?" she asked softly, her voice cracking. "Then you'll rebuild. You'll learn from it, but you can't do any of that until you own up to your reality," I replied, hoping to push her toward the truth. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded, a flicker of understanding lighting up her eyes. "You're right. I need to do this. I need to face what I've done," she said, her voice resolute. In the days that followed, she began to take action. She reached out to colleagues, acknowledging her mistakes and the impact of her actions, not just on her career but also on her marriage. It was a slow process, but I could see changes in her. She was starting to take responsibility for her actions, and there was a sense of maturity in how she was handling things. Meanwhile, the fallout from Mark's scandal continued to unfold. He was losing support and credibility by the day, and the media was relentless. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction as I watched the repercussions of their shared choices. I had made my mark and it felt just. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, Laura looked more composed than I had seen her in weeks. I've spoken with my boss. They're considering reinstating me, but I have to prove that I can be trusted again," she said, her voice steady. "And I want to work on our marriage too, Mike. I know I've messed up, but I want to make it right." I looked at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. It was a stark contrast to the woman I had confronted just weeks ago. "I appreciate that, Laura, but it will take time for me to trust you again. Trust is earned and you have a long road ahead," I replied, my voice even. "I understand. I'm willing to do whatever it takes," she said, determination etched on her face. As the weeks passed, we began to navigate a new path together. It was difficult. There were moments of tension and pain, but there was also a glimmer of hope. We attended counseling sessions, where we both learned to express our feelings and confront the issues that had led us to this moment. Through it all, I started to find pieces of myself again. I realized that I had been so focused on Laura's ambitions that I had lost sight of my own needs and desires. I reconnected with friends, pursued my interests, and even began to dream about my future in a way I hadn't in years. Our relationship began to shift, not back to what it once was, but into something new. We were learning to communicate better, to be honest with each other, and to confront our issues instead of sweeping them under the rug. It was a painful process, but it was also cathartic. One night, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, I turned to her and said, "I'm proud of you. You're taking responsibility and working toward a better future. I know it hasn't been easy." She smiled softly, her eyes glistening. "Thank you, Mike. I couldn't have done this without you pushing me to face the truth. You've shown me the importance of honesty, even when it hurts." As we sat together in that moment, I realized that while the road ahead was still uncertain, we were both committed to forging a new path. I had learned that betrayal can shatter trust, but with hard work and dedication, it's possible to rebuild, even if it looks different than before. Life doesn't always go as planned, but I had emerged from this experience stronger and more self-aware. It was a long journey to reclaim my power, but I was ready to face whatever came next, whether that was with Laura or on my own. I had learned valuable lessons about trust, responsibility, and the importance of standing up for myself. In the end, I knew that I was moving forward, and that was all that mattered.